imagine South Beach today, but instead of seeing everybody between 18 and 28, I think of everybody between like 81 and 82.
Miami, I think this is like, I feel like being in heaven.
What do you do for fun?
Nothing, I sit on the porch. It was colorful.
That's a clip from the award-winning film The Last Resort from a couple of years ago. And it documents what life was like for Jewish seniors living in Miami Beach, Florida in the 1970s. Back then, before the area was gentrified into the glitzy playground of the wealthy that it is today, Miami's Art Deco hotels were filled with Jewish snowbirds, many of them Holocaust survivors from Canada and New York. When Canadian photographer Naomi Harris arrived in Miami Beach at the end of the 1990s, she found Miami Beach had become seedy, even full of crime, but she wound up finding something beautiful as well as she embarked on her own real-life version of the Golden Girls TV episodes. She was in her mid-20s when she moved in to a rundown Miami Beach hotel called the Haddon Hall. It's on Collins Avenue in South Beach. And she spent the next 2 years photographing the hotel's aging tenants, Jewish or not. Her parents thought she was nuts. Why, they wondered, would Harris want to spend time with feisty snowbird pensioners instead of people her own age? It had something to do with Harris's own grandmother being a Holocaust survivor. Harris loved the Haddon Hall tenants. She became friends with them and captured their simple pleasures in vibrant color.
They were appreciative of having attention bestowed upon them. You know, who's this weird, at the time I was 26, who's this weird young lady that wants to spend all her time hanging out with us boobies and zadies?
I'm Ellen Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Tuesday, January the 17th, 2023. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. Harris's Miami Beach work was supposed to come out nearly 25 years ago, but when 9/11 happened, the project was shelved and she moved on to other themes. Now she has a new book out called The Haddon Hall, and it's been receiving favorable reviews and several awards since it was published. I was supposed to interview Naomi Harris live in person in December at the CJN's Hanukkah party and magazine launch in Toronto, but that day the weather had other ideas and it was a snowstorm, and so we had to cancel. Her photos, though, are in the CJN's Hanukkah edition of our magazine, including the startling cover showing a 90-year-old woman joyfully preparing to take a dip in the ocean. By now, all of the snowbirds in Harris's photo essay have long since passed away, and Harris, has since lost both of her own parents, for whom she spent the past couple of years being their caregivers. Naomi Harris joins me now to explain why her Miami Beach photos have a much different meaning to her than they did when she took them all those years ago. Why has it taken until now for these photos and the story to be put together in a book and a display?
Okay, so originally when I photographed it back in 1999, 2000, 2001, I didn't realize at the time that I was really capturing the end of an era. There weren't as many seniors there. They were mainly at Haddon Hall, maybe a couple of other places, but not really. Like the bulk of the old retirees, the snowbirds, were at Haddon Hall. And when you're living it, it's very different than when you look back at something with so much time behind you. To be honest, I would have made a very different book back then because a lot of the people would have still been alive and it would have been more about these people, how they live as seniors in Miami at that moment in time. Whereas now when you look back at it some 20 odd years later, it's remembering this period of time, and it doesn't exist anymore. And I'm actually happy that it got postponed. I think it's a stronger project because of that.
Except that none of these people, I assume, are still with us.
No. If they would, they'd be 120. No, exactly. A lot of the people were in their 80s, 90s. Some were 100. So, unfortunately, yes, it's the sad truth of it that they don't get to enjoy seeing themselves. But frankly, I would share pictures with a lot of them and they'd see themselves and they'd be like, oh, thanks. Like when I'd give them a photo, because I think for a lot of them, they're like, oh, great, this is what I look like. I'm old. They were not necessarily so enthusiastic to see a picture of themselves at that age. But
what fascinates me is I'm old enough to remember that area of Miami and that era. I'm old enough to remember visiting my grandparents. They used to go to Safety Harbor Spa, early bird specials.
I wasn't a Wolfie person. I was a Rascal House person. I thought they were a little cleaner, I liked the doggy bags you got at the end. I preferred Rascal House.
How different is the snowbird experience that today from that era snowbirding? Because I think that if people see the pictures, the ones you talked about were not well off.
Yeah. So first of all, at the height of the snowbird era in South Beach, 20,000 people, mostly Jewish, not all, but mostly, picture, and mostly Holocaust survivors. So picture 20,000 old Jews. At the time, maybe some of them would have been in their 60s and then they became in their 70s and 80s. But just this mass exodus from not just Toronto, Montreal, but also New York, Baltimore, all the major hubs of Jewish cultural hubs, all migrated down to Miami Beach. And when I was there, it was already the tail end. When I read about it and I hear about that there were bakeries and butcher shops and the amount of Jewish kosher food and it was basically living in Brooklyn, but now you're on the beach instead of back home. There was, so all of that unfortunately is gone. All the cafeterias, all the places like Wolfie's, the places you could live like a king on a fixed income. The hotel owners must have been pinching themselves. What? These people want to stay 3, 4, 5, 6 months? They were making good money. And at the end of it, though, I hate to say it, but when the Mariellis boat lift came in and the Cubans started coming in, it became rough, it became dangerous, and it changed. That was the beginning of the end of that era. That and the discovery of how the Art Deco was now, a lot of hotels were being torn down, and then there were people like Ian Schrager who were coming in and buying. He bought the Delano, so that was the first really the mass renovation of a hotel. Now the Delano was much bigger; it was taller than a lot of these other hotels. But Madonna started coming down. All these people started discovering it. Gianni Versace, made his mansion, and so it started becoming a chic place to go. And with that, the prices started going up. That's unfortunately what happened to it. And I think those snowbirds of today that go down to Miami are either people who inherited their parents' condos, or they've been in the family for, decades, or they're doing a little better than the average snowbird that used to stay at places like Haddon Hall.
Let's talk about the process of getting permission for your photography to go ahead from these subjects. Did you have to promise them not to use their full names?
I think people were there were a couple of people who didn't want to be photographed, and they let me know pretty early on. For a lot of them, their children, there's one woman in particular, I'm thinking of Helen, her son, the doctor, put her in, Haddon, and she would brag about him. He would come one day a year for a day. So a lot of people, they didn't see their children from 1 month for very long periods of time. So here I was, and I wanted to not just photograph them, I wanted to hear their stories. But in general, I found Miami to be a very lonely place. So I would watch Golden Girls. It was on 6 times a day. I can recite most episodes. Or I would hang out with the real life Golden Girls.
You said, it's been said, and you said it elsewhere, that you felt closer to them when you were in your 20s than you would with people your own age. Can you tell us a little bit more, unpack that for me?
I always used to joke, I'm like an 80-year-old Jewish man in a 25-year-old Jewish body. Now when you say I'm an 80-year-old Jewish man in an almost 50, it doesn't have quite the same impact. But I think in general, my sentiment is, I always feel like I was born in the wrong generation. I would have been better off. Look, I know that there were terrible things during the Depression and World War II, whatever, but I think there was a simplicity then that I'm a much more simple, Hamish person. And so like, I think I would have been very happy if I was an old person living at Haddon Hall, going to get like a matzo ball soup or a hamantash or something like that. I think it's just that I'm not into the whole bells and whistles of modern times, I guess.
Were they happy? The ones in Haddon Hall for $1.50 a bed per night, and you said fixed pension. Were they happy?
Right. I mean, the $1.50 that was from that's in the book. That's an image, but that's not what they were paying. They were paying more. That was like from an older ad that the art director found. I'd say for the most part they were. There were a few people who. Look, I also talk about it in the book. Pearl was a very depressive individual. She also had some of the people had very sad lives. She lost her husband when he was 50. So, and she didn't work. He was the breadwinner. So she only lived on his pension. Then her daughter, who was helping take care of her, she died. So Pearl just kept going. And like they would say, like, I don't know why I keep going on, because at the end of the day, she also had Parkinson's and she had poor health. So, but there were moments of joy even then, I think. Most of the people I'd say in the project or in the hotel who I dealt with, who I photographed or I, tended to migrate to, they were for the most part pretty happy. Like the three sisters from Quebec, they were great. Like they would go to the ocean every day. They would go to the pool. They would play games. They would make food in there. Like they were having a great time. So I think for the most part, people, like when you do a survey of people in general, not everyone's happy. And also this idea of like, what does happy even mean? Like we live in a time now with toxic positivity where we're always supposed to be happy. No, like, you know what? I'm talking to you right now. My mom died about 6 weeks ago. I have my good days. I have my bad days. You know what? At the end of the year, when I was writing some emails to people and I was writing to them like, oh, I can't wait for 2022 to be done. It was a dumpster fire of a year. And then I stopped and I thought about it and I said, actually, 2022 was pretty good. I had 11 out of 12 months with my mom. We got to watch season 5 of The Crown together. We got to watch the Jubilee. We got to watch we had really, many days in my mom's glorious backyard. She was an avid gardener.
Well, I want to say I'm on the record again. I'm so sorry for your loss, and I think it's important that we do some tie-in with this project coming out. Did your parents ever meet any of the people you profiled from Haddon Hall? Or
yeah, actually, I have to find it, but I have a photo. There's the woman Gina, who's the centerfold in my book. She was wonderful. She was a Polish woman. The rumor was she fought in the Polish underground, and I love to picture her because she like purred when she talked. She was like Eartha Kitt meets Greta Garbo, and I like to picture her kind of like seducing Nazis and then, off with their heads. But I have a picture of my father dancing with her at one of the dances at Haddon Hall. So yeah, they didn't necessarily meet everybody, but my dad and my mom came down once when I was there, and they met some of the people.
Because they would have been their kids' age, right? Of these.
Yeah, I guess so, yes. I'm like the grandchildren's age. My parents would have been the children's age, exactly.
What did your parents think of this project? Because you were moving to Miami to live with a bunch of old people.
It's funny. Like, this is their favorite. It's in some ways, it's my favorite project, too. But it was definitely my parents' favorite project of all the projects I've done. I mean, needless to say, the next book I did, or the next project I worked on was about swingers. So maybe that has something to do with why this is their favorite project.
And I don't know if you've seen the reviews. I'm sure you watched for them. One of them, I'm going to swear, guys. This is a little trigger, or what we call this, parental advisory. Tablet Magazine, I'm sure you've seen it, called the book, quote, "Seniors Who Don't Give a Fuck," unquote, and were being celebrated, and makes us feel bad we didn't visit them enough. Do you agree with that review?
I mean, the point of my project was not a guilt trip. I mean, although, like everything in Judaism, everything has a little tinge of guilt in it, right? There is something to say about that. I do feel that seniors are overlooked always. And we don't remember that these people had wild youth, some of them. We just assume that they're always old and that means they're stupid and they don't have what to say, or they're not, and we forget that we're going to get there someday. So why are we also having these preconceived notions? Just because someone's got, wrinkles, it doesn't make them closed-minded. That's why I can't stand the whole Gen Z boomer type, comments, because it's just well, just because people don't see things the way you see them, it doesn't mean that they don't have their own concepts or thoughts.
I don't know if you're aware, the controversy, the comments that we got by having this beautiful picture as the cover.
I'm not aware. Share some with me.
We got some, how could you put this picture on? It's horrible. I don't need to see that. Which I guess as a photographer, you can take either way. But how does these comments make you feel? And then we'll end.
Well, okay. I mean, why is it not what they want to see?
Wait, I should just interrupt. This is a picture I should tell for our listeners. If you haven't got the CJN magazine, you describe, who is this picture about and what does it show?
It's Madeline standing on the beach with her arms to her side, really excited to go into the water. And she was 90, and her sister Denise, it's a shot at Miami Beach. So it's bright blue sky, puffy white clouds, two senior people in the water with bathing caps. Yeah, so it's very specific to the era, if you will. I can only deduct that the reason it upset people, unless the readership are so ultra-Orthodox and they can't stand to see a person in a bathing suit, I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it's that they don't want to see a 90-year-old in a bathing suit, period. And that's really sad. I mean, if that's body shaming, that's ageism. That's really what, we should only see supermodels on the beach? I don't know. I feel bad for people if this picture upset them, because I see joy, and where I see joy, they obviously see something that's much more, it's clearly from within.
All right. Well, we have to end it there. It's been fascinating to dig into this and the larger issues that have come out of the project and your time in Toronto. I really appreciate you being on the CJN Daily. It's been great to have you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ellen. It's really nice, and maybe we'll meet in person someday.
And in case you're wondering whatever happened to the Haddon Hall Hotel, well, it was sold a few times. It's now been transformed into a boutique resort hotel catering to LGBTQ travelers. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. Today's listener shoutout goes to Dr. Richard Pass of Toronto, who's now in Florida for the winter. Wednesday, we'll be back with the story of the late Jerry Gross, one of the last surviving Canadian Machal soldiers who volunteered to fight for Israel in the 1948 War of Independence. He passed away in Montreal at the age of 97. Thanks for listening. Talk to you then.